One of the important things to understand with AI is what an LLM is and how it functions. It stands for Large Language Model. So the important thing to understand is that it's not really a database. It's not searching an encyclopedia or looking up facts. It's basically just generating text from patterns that it learned during its training. And we've already made another video about how AI trains, so be sure to watch that, but we'll go over some basic details here. Now, there are some AI products that also search the web or retrieve documents, but that's an extra system built around the model, not necessarily the base large language model, which is what we're talking about here. So like I mentioned, the key thing is that this is all a prediction problem. So behind every large language model, you have to understand that language has patterns. So if you were to read this sentence, she poured her coffee into the... Now you already know that the next word is probably going to be cup or mug, and it's not because you're a psychic, it's because you've seen that thousands of times, that pattern. And a large language model is trained to do the same thing, but the key is just the massive scale. During training, that model is going to see enormous amounts of text, books, articles, code, research papers, forums, websites, tons of other sources. And the goal of training is simple. It's just to predict the next token, compare it to what the actual answer is, calculate that error, and adjust the parameters using gradient descent. Now that might sound complicated, but again, we went over it in our training video and it's really not that hard. So again, predicting the next token. For now, you can think of that as the goal of training. And a token isn't necessarily the next word, it's more like a chunk of text. So for example, if you take the word unbelievable, you could consider this to be 3 tokens rather than 1. Tokens are just the unit that the model works with. So when they train these models on billions of examples, its job is to predict what that next token is going to be, and along the way, compare to the correct answer, and then update the parameters, which we'll talk about over and over again until it's getting the right answer more often than not. And by the end of that training process, it's learned an enormous amount about how language works, not because anyone programmed in the grammar rules, but because it analyzed those patterns that emerge through the data by itself. And it's really interesting because just this ability to predict the next token is what forms these extremely complex and very cool AIs that lead to writing code and translating languages and all the cool stuff that it's doing now, because it learns to do all those things in an effort to identify the patterns and be able to solidify that ability to guess the next token. Again, watch the training video on the details of this. It's very interesting, but we'll move on for now. Now, when it comes to the large in large language model, it stands for the parameters, the number of parameters in that model. And parameters are basically just adjustable values inside that model. So you can think of them like billions of tiny little adjustable settings that collectively determine how that model responds. So at the start of training, it's basically random. And then over the course of training and correction, they get tuned based on all that data that comes through until they're tuned specifically so that the model can predict pretty accurately what's going on. So modern LLMs, they have billions, sometimes hundreds of billions of these parameters. To give you an idea, GPT-3, which is fairly outdated by now, had 175 billion. And again, it's hard to wrap our heads around this level of scale, but the scale is the important thing. The more data that it trains on, and the more accurately these parameters are fine-tuned, it begins to exhibit these capabilities that we see: translation, summarization, coding, math problem solving, stuff that wasn't even explicitly programmed into the model. It's just from pattern recognition and adjusting these parameters. And this is the kind of cool and scary part, is that researchers still don't fully understand why this works or how this works. Just adjusting these parameters and making gradual improvements in pattern recognition just leads to these crazy capabilities. So how does it actually go from predicting words to having what seems like a conversation with you? This is where fine tuning comes in. So after the initial training, the model is just basically a really sophisticated next token predictor. It's going to complete text, but it's not necessarily going to be helpful in a conversational way. So then what they'll do is an additional training phase where human trainers can write examples of good responses or rank different outputs, and the model is going to learn to produce the kind of response that makes it a helpful assistant. This is sometimes known as instruction tuning, or RLHF, which is reinforcement learning from human feedback. And these more modern systems have more complex and additional techniques, but the basic idea is the same. It's to teach the model to behave like a helpful assistant that's conversational rather than just data-based. That's why when you use ChatGPT or Claude or whatever, it feels like an assistant that you're having a conversation with rather than just text being completed. It's because of this additional fine-tuning on top of the large language model. Now, the other key concept to understand is the context window. So every LLM has a limit on how much text it's going to be able to process all at once, and that limit is the context window. Everything inside that window, the question you ask, the conversation history, any documents that you attach, that's what the model can see when it's generating a response for you. And earlier on, these context windows were very small, maybe a few thousand tokens. And then the more recent models, they're up to hundreds of thousands of tokens. And the reason this matters is because the model can't really access anything outside the current context window when it's generating its next response. That's why sometimes it seems like chatbots forget things from earlier, or they don't know things that maybe you mentioned way before or in a different chat, is because it's not in the context window. Now, there are additional abilities it has to access documents and search up the web and things like that. But again, that's built on top of the LLMs. It's not a feature of the LLMs. So just to keep it basic, the context window is what provides it relevant information to give you your response. Now, the key thing to remember is there's a lot that the LLM doesn't know. Like I said, its data is based on what was captured during training. So it doesn't know what's happening in the world today in real time. There are AI features and assistants that overcome this by searching the internet or using external tools, but right now we're just talking about that large language model itself. It's not magically updating in real time. It was trained on data up to a certain point in time before it was released to you. And that was the training cutoff. Anything that happened after that, it's not within the raw model parameters. And usually it's not just going to tell you that it doesn't know, it'll make things up, which is a hallucination. And it's not lying, it's just generating the best answer based on the patterns that it's learned, even though in this case, those patterns might point to something that's incorrect. It's just giving you the most reasonable sounding next token or answer. That's why it can sound totally confident but be completely wrong. And this is a very real limitation of AI. So always be careful and always verify information on your own. And that's pretty much it, guys. That's the basics of how LLMs work and what they are and what these models are based on. So hopefully that helps you guys out and you use them in a better way. Be sure to check out our other videos to understand some of these concepts a little deeper. You can check the description for our newsletter, our community, a bunch of cool stuff being worked on there, and we'll see you next time.